Hello, wherever you're joining us from today, I want to say a huge welcome to our global community. We hope you're enjoying the Product Marketing Festival. I also want to send out an extra special thank you to all our sponsors, partners, speakers and participants who together have made this event possible. Their sessions are bursting with insights to help you level up. But remember, the learning doesn't stop here. If you aren't already, you can become a PMA member and benefit from unlimited access to exclusive templates, frameworks, mentors, and our entire library of on-demand event content. Make sure you have your questions at the ready. Simply post your question in the comments section and get awesome advice directly from our expert speakers. Or continue the conversation with your fellow product marketers in the PMA Slack community. What's not to love about that? So now, on to the next talk.
What is the difference between good and great? Best-selling author Jim Collins famously set out to answer this question in his book, Good to Great. Collins and his team identified companies that leapt from good results to great results and sustained them for at least 15 years, and compared them to companies that were merely good in the process. The difference? The great companies didn't just beat the good ones. They outperformed them by a mile, averaging nearly 7x the general market return over that period. There was nothing remarkable about these companies before they hit the transition point, and Collins spends much of his book trying to group these organizations together to understand why they were able to deliver such exceptional nonlinear returns. And he starts the book by saying good is the enemy of the great. And that is one of the reasons why we have so little that becomes great. I would argue we often take this approach in product marketing. We have launch frameworks and deadlines with generally accepted practices to follow. We have slides to build, sales teams to enable, and product managers to keep happy. And ticking the boxes and delivering what's required, or just good product marketing, can meet everyone's expectations. But marketing is a non-linear practice. The audience we deliver it to doesn't care about frameworks. Many industries are cluttered with a sea of content and sales representatives. Prospective buyers have not just busy jobs, but busy lives to contend with. And as an audience, we're conditioned and used to reading and tuning out the good. Good product marketing doesn't cut through this, but great product marketing does, and engages your audiences, and it tells them what you're all about. And just like great companies can deliver outsized market returns, I would argue that great product marketing can deliver an outsized impact for your organization, and we should strive for this in every launch that we do. And that's why I set out to create a framework to take your and my product marketing from good to great, so that every launch we have crushes the competition and your goals. And the aim of today is to share this working draft with you, some examples that might stick, some quotes from leading product marketers, and hopefully you can take some actionable ideas to apply to your next launch. My name is Nick McLaughlin, and I'm a product marketing manager at Adobe, and thanks for taking the time to listen to this talk today. You can check me out on some of the links below, but in a nutshell, I've been in the advertising space for 8 years. And I've been working across Asia Pacific and most recently the US. I'm a massive believer in technology's impact and its ability to make a difference. And for me, everything is a story that we can tell better. If we can find the story and match it with the key insight, we can make it so simple to connect with an audience, make it retellable, and drive revenue for a business. So what does this framework look like? Well, you can leverage these 3 categories at different stages of your product marketing launch process to create extra impact in your campaigns if you follow them. Chaos to Concept is about distilling a complex product or industry into its most essential aspects. This is your information gathering phase. And what's critical here is opening your process up to as much information as possible, but then organizing it into a framework that's as simple as it can be. This nicely dovetails into the second pillar, which is frameworks and flair. By building your work into robust and comprehensive frameworks, supported by the correct detail, you create the foundation to enable creativity to flourish and maximize the impact. And finally, launching for longevity. By prioritizing consistency and expanding intentionally, you focus your customers' minds on what's important, building salience, reputation, and trust. So the modern digital-first consumer is more intentional, impatient, and demanding, and more efficient in their decision-making than previous generations. Potential customers simply don't have time or the bandwidth to fight through endless jargon or unclear value in order to see the benefit of your product. And that's why it's so critical to define a simple yet engaging product narrative to create the foundations for prospects to buy into your vision, making it easier for your sales teams to get to the key aspect of the message, even when you're not in the room. And that's what Chaos to Concept is about. It's all about cutting through the jargon and distilling the complexities of an industry into a clear, understandable arc that creates the right context for your product to showcase its most valuable assets. Product marketers need to reject the status quo and design a narrative that can't be ignored, says Marcus Andrews. The views of your sales team and product teams are important, but it's equally important to pay attention to what your competitors are saying, what your customers are saying, what your partners are saying, and bring all of this together to create a story that is truly unique and clear. Find the point of leverage that no one else can compete with and ensure that it's pervasive throughout your story. Once you have this, remember to remove as much jargon as possible and get into clear and simple terms as possible the message that you're trying to convey. You want your story to be easy to retell. And just because you live in a world of acronyms and technical language doesn't mean your customer or sales teams do. One of my favorite examples of making a story easy to retell is the story of how eBay went from Perfect Markets to Pez. In November 97, when buying things on the internet was still reserved primarily for a small segment of the population, the eBay leadership embarked on a vision tour. The idea was to get their CEO and founder in front of industry analysts and reporters to spread the word about the growth and potential of eBay and their passionate user base. CEO Pierre Omidyar was prepared for questions around the challenges of buying products on the internet and even some skepticism. But what he encountered was much worse. No one at all was interested in the story. In the words of their early head of PR, Mary Song, no one wanted to hear a story about a 30-year-old genius who wanted to create the perfect market. That just wasn't what eBay was about. And that's when it hit her. She needed to tell a more accessible story. And she had just the one. CEO Omidyar's fiance had just moved to Silicon Valley, and she was having a hard time finding people who shared her interest in collecting and trading Pez dispensers. And when Song started calling up reporters, she said that while Perfect Markets was their official founding story, the real inspiration was Pierre Omidyar creating a place for his fiance to sell her Pez dispensers. And from here, the legend was born. And the eBay story really started to catch fire as they had something that was easy to retell and matched what they were all about. Many people could talk about Pez in a way that they couldn't talk about a perfect market. So by making the same point in a more accessible way, Song had found a way to retell the story that would stick in people's minds and have an outsized impact. In short, the story went from good to great. From Pez to milkshakes. Another key aspect of Chaos to Concept is to find the hidden motivators that truly drive demand for your products. Rather than just sitting in a room with your team and hypothesizing what people think is important or just listening to what your sellers are saying, it's also important to get out into the field yourself and truly and impartially test this out. A famous example that I love is Clayton Christensen's milkshake case study. He was engaged to conduct in-depth observations of a fast food restaurant chain's customers and understand why they were actually buying these milkshakes to grow and drive revenue. Now, while the surveys of the customers outside of this time told them that consumers cared about price, flavor, health, the restaurant was finding that this didn't actually change any decision-making. So Christensen started observing and interviewing customers right when they purchased the product. And he found what customers really wanted was something to keep them entertained while they went about their morning commute. By focusing on a different aspect of what the real motivator for their customers was, the restaurant was able to create the ultimate commuter beverage and saw a significant rise in revenue. This wasn't 100% intuitive, but the product was able to go from good to great. Now, product marketers can apply some key practices in order to better perform this narrative chaos to concept phase of their role. Number one is to embrace a curious mindset. To uncover the hidden links beneath the surface that will help your narrative resonate with your intended audience, you can probe your engineering leads, product managers, customers, and sales teams to find that spark that holds the key in realizing value and place that at the center of your story. Try to find the unintuitive human motivations that drive the decision to buy or not buy your product. And if something is interesting to you, make sure you dig into that. Secondly is to be customer zero for your story. As you go on a journey to understand a new feature, industry, or service, make sure that you take note of what happened while you went through this journey. Were you bored as you read through industry primers? Was it hard to wrap your head around something? Was it easy for you to tell that story straight away? Take note and don't make the same mistake when you go about your launch. And finally, and something I am very interested in myself, is sharing widely and bracing for impact. Sharing your work with a wide range of trusted stakeholders will give you ample opportunity to sharpen your work and develop faster feedback loops on the strength of your story. It might bruise your ego a little bit in the process, but being open to constructive feedback is a core tenet of powerful story development, because it means you're building on not just your own experience, but the experiences of others that you might be too close yourself to see. Next, we move on to frameworks and flair. This is an exciting one because the old adage of "I fell into product marketing" often reflects that many of us who've come to this role did so because we might be creative, we might make great content, we might tell a great story, and none of us really went to school for product marketing. Very few of us actually start our careers as product marketers, and newcomers generally enter either with a product engineering or sales background, combined with some kind of predisposition towards storytelling that helped them succeed in their previous role. And if you're anything like me, you initially heard about a lot of these frameworks that help shape a story, and things like positioning statements and launch grids, and you might have thought that it actually crimped the creativity that got you into this place. It can often feel like these frameworks constrict creativity. But when applied correctly, it's clear that balancing frameworks and flair together is not zero sum at all, but additive in turning your work from good to great. Frameworks can add the rigor and the foundation to properly direct your creativity or flair to drive the critical business outcomes that a narrative or launch set out to deliver. Creativity excels within constraints. The framework approach takes away some of the mental gymnastics needed to make up a good narrative or launch work and frees up your brain for innovation, says my old boss, Mary Sheehan. By approaching frameworks and flair in a methodical approach, we can make our work impactful and rigorous, creative and robust. It takes these two things from seemingly countervailing forces into complementary ones. And why is this important? Because if we do one or the other, we don't give ourselves an opportunity for greatness. You can deliver the most incredible creative activation, but if the frameworks and plans don't exist to provide it with longevity or power, it might be forgotten in a week, or even worse, not push the customer to actually digest the message you pushed across. And if we just follow frameworks, we're opened up to commoditization. Anything in the market that is successful is quickly copied by many people. And an example of this is a Bloomberg 2020 article about the growth of brands who follow an identikit formula of business model, look and feel, and tone of voice. And while this might prove successful at hitting short-term business metrics, make it easier to scale and lower the costs and risk of creating a brand, these brands will be put to the test and when they look to drive longevity. And when the ecosystem shifts and they're looking to expand, they may find that it's a lot harder and they're reliant on those things that got them there in the first place. So how can you build frameworks and flair? Well, number one, make sure you leverage what exists, right? There's no need to reinvent the wheel. All of the frameworks you could possibly ever need really to power your launch efforts already exist, created by PMMs and marketers that came before you. There's timeless tools that go back decades. A few recent ones I really like is obviously April Dunford's positioning framework and Product Marketing Alliance and Marcus's narrative design course. And these have been tested and honed by years to help people articulate, road test, and gain internal buy-in for launches to ensure that it has the rigor to cover bases and drive business outcomes. This will save you time and your sanity and give you the space to innovate on top of strong foundations. The second is to ask yourself, are you not entertained? Once you've packaged your launch up, it's time to let your creative brain get to work. Ticking all the boxes on a launch list and pushing it out the door might mean your launch looks polished, but it might miss the spark to connect with people. At some point in this phase, it's critical to remember that your audience is human. They might not read your copy or watch your webinar if it's simple and boring. Be honest with yourself and assess if the launch is looking a little flat, and find ideas that will help this really grow. Finally, it's hard for many brands or consumers to conceptualize, adopting, or purchasing something that they fully don't understand, which is why repetition and exposure are so critical to building awareness, trust, credibility, and mindshare. And it's often tempting to rip up the playbook to tell a story of a new feature or take on a competitor, your prospects need to understand what you stand for. And it's hard to do this if your narrative changes all the time. And so, as we touched on in the previous example, we need to focus on launching for longevity. Good product marketing might have a strong launch day, but great product marketing stands the test of time. And I love this quote from Kevin Garcia, the head of product marketing at Retool. He says, great product narratives are all about consistency. By telling one story in multiple acts, you give customers the chance to get very familiar with your narrative. Over time, that familiarity turns into confidence. And once your customers deeply care about who you are and what you do, every product launch works better. Once you've done the foundations in the first two parts, you can expand on this work in the rest. Launching for longevity is about viewing each release as a piece in the jigsaw of your customer's mind. Unless you're launching a new product or story, every incremental release should be seen as an opportunity to add clarity to the work that your company does on behalf of your customers. Companies such as Disney, Apple, and Ford have done this over decades. And some great recent examples in the digital space are the likes of Stripe and Shopify. Stripe has a simple and clear mission to be the payment infrastructure for the internet. And every product release I find fits really easily into their mission and narrative, making product launches easier to understand and additive to what they've already been building. So how can you do this? Well, number one, consistency is key. If you've got your positioning right, it should be clear what you want to say. There's nothing revelatory in this, and it's been part of marketing forever, but it's sometimes forgotten in product marketing. Ensure that the core message is clear and omnipresent over time across channels, including marketing, sales, case studies, and more. Once you've got this, making sure that when you have a launch coming out or you're doing a new channel, make sure that there's subtle tweaks rather than major overhauls. And this is really because you shouldn't need to release a new story or narrative every time. You don't need to reinvent everything. Building on top of the existing story by finding new and innovative ways to say or leverage different channels to say the same thing can be a core element of enabling longevity. Customer stories are a great vessel for this, which can help the middle of the market view what you've been talking about through a lens that makes it easier for them to relate and clearly see the benefits and the ability to do this themselves. And finally, building a mental FAQ for your next release. The launch date for your product, feature, or narrative should be seen as day one of your next refresh. Rather than dusting your hands off and moving on, keeping an honest, keen eye on how everything lands and the type of questions you'll get can help you understand what you need to do for your next release. So finally, what I shared with you today isn't revelatory, and these principles are built on the work of decades of amazing product marketers and over a century of incredible marketing. If you don't believe me, go and read a book from the 1960s or 1970s about marketing. A lot of it is the same, even if the channels and speed and frequency and everything we deal with today has changed. And ultimately, if you take one thing away from this article, it would be every time you have a piece of work, how can I make this great? And often that's all the spark that a project needs. So if you like this today, I'm a massive reader. I have a ton of different recommendations that I could share, but I have a couple of different books that I would like to say can help you dig into three different aspects of this presentation. One is that in Chaos to Concept, there's a couple of books called Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke. Is just a great way to understand decision-making and how people perceive things, which I think is really important as you look to understand an industry or challenge and get into the minds of your customer. While the storytelling animal really helps you wrap your head around, how to tell a story, how people connect, and the shape of these things that people need. As we get to Framework and Flair, April Dunford's Obviously Awesome has come out a few years ago, and I think it's recommended reading for everyone that checks it out. It's just such a great book that talks about product positioning to get your customers to, as they say, get it, buy it, love it. And on the Flair side, I think Alchemy by Rory Sutherland is just a great way to think about adding that spark and bit of magic to every campaign that you do, which I love to take away for myself. And in the launching for longevity side, Hitmakers is a great way about how ideas and things have been innovated over time and how something can be built up and built up and built up. And eventually that idea hits that spark point, which helps it go viral and really just gives a lot of great analogies and different ways to think about ideas and continuing to innovate on a story that is just about to work. And the other one is Nobody Wants to Read Your Shit by Steven Pressfield, which is just a great book about, keeping yourself honest when you're putting things out the door, making sure everything relates, making sure everyone can understand it, making sure you're cutting out a lot of jargon. So these are 6 books. I'm sure I could recommend 10 more, but really great places to get started on all of this stuff, as well as everything, already that we have in the product marketing communities. If you have any questions and follow-ups, I'd love to hear from you. This is my Twitter. This is my LinkedIn. Please reach out. My name is Nick McLaughlin. And thank you so much for engaging with this presentation today.